Hello, I'm Sarah Robinson from Nautilus, and today I'll be talking about working at sea with ADHD with Dr Sue Stannard, Chief Medical Advisor at the UK Maritime and Coastguard Agency. Welcome, Sue.
Thanks, Sarah.
It's Sue's job to oversee the approved doctors who are licensed by the MCA to carry out fitness to work assessments for seafarers. Sue, can you tell us a bit about what happens in the assessments and about the fitness certification system in the UK?
Probably best to start by saying that all seafarers require a medical certificate to work at sea, and that can either be an ENG1 or an ML5. And there's lots more information about that on the government website, gov.uk. The ENG certificate can only be issued by an MCA approved doctor, and there's a list of those doctors and their locations and contact details available on the same website. The ENG examination requires a detailed medical history, which is based on self-declaration by the seafarer, and it's important that they tell us about all of their medical conditions, past and present. They will then have a full clinical examination that does involve undressing down to their underwear, and this is all explained in a consent form that they should be given before the examination takes place. Once the examination has taken place, an assessment of fitness is made, and that is done in line with the legal requirements outlined in MSN 1886, again available on the internet. All certificates have to be issued to these standards. That's the law. And we aim for a consistent and standardised examination and decision-making process. So the main issues to be considered in making that fitness assessment are the risk of suddenly becoming unwell and unable to do the required duties, and of course of requiring a level of medical care that cannot be delivered on board in an appropriate time frame to treat the medical problem. That puts the seafarer at risk and can put others on board at risk as well. All decisions are made within the context of the role of the seafarer, what their jobs are, both their routine and emergency duties, and also the geographical area in which they will be sailing. It is very different for somebody working just offshore to somebody traversing the great oceans on a regular basis. After the examination, we hope a certificate can be issued, and of course everybody hopes that's an unrestricted certificate valid for the maximum 2-year validity period. That makes everybody happy. But if the seafarer has a medical condition, that might not be possible in line with the standards of MSN 1886, and the certificate may be time limited, for example issued only for 1 year to allow monitoring of a medical condition, or to monitor an individual's adaptation to working at sea. Your members will know better than most that working at sea is not the same as working on shore. Living at sea is also very different to living on shore. In addition, a certificate may be restricted either to a particular geographical area or to certain duties on board, depending on the medical condition.
Now, you were saying that seafarers must tell the approved doctors if they have an existing medical condition. And we know that recently some of the doctors have observed an increase in applicants declaring attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is better known as ADHD. So, Sue, what is ADHD?
Okay, so on a very high level, ADHD is a condition that affects an individual's behaviour. They may seem restless, have difficulty concentrating, seeing tasks through to completion, and be impulsive, tending to act before they think through the consequences of those actions. Really important to say that it doesn't affect all people in the same way. There's a massive range of symptoms. I could spend the next hour talking about that, but we haven't got time for that. And I really would refer people back to their own medical professionals, or there's a lot of information available on the NHS and other websites. If I may, just to come back to the first point you made there, it is really important that seafarers are honest and open with their approved doctor about ADHD and any other medical condition. Failure to do so may put themselves at risk, most importantly, but also may put others on board the ship and its operation at risk. We want to see seafarers go to sea safely. I really want to stress that not everyone with ADHD will have all of these symptoms, and the severity varies enormously. So having ADHD in itself does not automatically mean that a seafarer is not fit to work at sea. We need to understand how ADHD affects that individual, and therefore we can make sure that it's safe for them to be working and potentially living on board for what is sometimes a considerable period of time. In addition, of course, some people are prescribed medication for ADHD, which may help them manage their symptoms, but come with side effects of its own. Again, all medication should be declared at an ENG1 medical examination, and it's really important that the seafarer is well established on a stable dose with good effect on their symptoms, but no side effects that can cause issues and affect safety at sea. It's not a good idea to be starting, stopping, or changing medication on board, because that can have a direct impact on the underlying condition.
So if we talk about the medication, now I understand that some medication prescribed for ADHD is described as controlled. Can you just tell us a bit about what that means and how that can be managed on board vessels when a person is at sea?
Sure. So controlled drugs are drugs that are subject to a high level of regulation by the government because they may cause addiction or be abused. Talking in general terms, controlled drugs can often only be issued for a set period of time, for example, 28 days. They must be signed for on receipt, they need to be stored in a safe way, etc. So it's really important that the seafarer discusses this with the healthcare professional who's prescribing them, with the pharmacist who's distributing them, and make sure that they have enough supply of medication to cover their contract on board if they're not coming back home on a daily, weekly, frequent basis. On board, these drugs must be declared to the master and they must be stored securely. It's important that the seafarer always carries a prescription, and they should also be given a conditions letter from the approved doctor to accompany the medication and to explain to people on board why this medication is required and that it must be stored securely. Really important as well to understand that these medications may actually be illegal in some countries, and therefore the company and the master should be aware, as this may affect route planning, contract planning, etc. Likewise, if a seafarer is travelling to join a ship, they must ensure that it's legal to carry the medication into the country they're travelling to or into any they're transiting through. And again, please carry these with the prescription from your doctor.
What does all this mean for somebody with ADHD who's seeking an ENG medical certificate so that they can work at sea? What information and documentation do they need to bring to the approved doctor who's carrying out their assessment?
Thank you for asking me that, because it's really important that the doctor has the information they need to make a full assessment. And as I said, the symptoms and the severity can vary hugely. But what matters particularly on board is how those symptoms affect the individual's ability to perform their routine and emergency duties and to live safely on board, which is obviously the case for many seafarers. So what's really useful is information about how the individual does these things at home. It's very useful to have a letter from the treating doctor. If somebody is on medication in particular, then somebody is prescribing this medication, and a letter from those people describing the seafarer's symptoms, the medication they're on, how long they've been on that medication, that there are no side effects, etc., is really useful. We appreciate, however, that it can be very difficult to get a formal diagnosis. Waiting lists are long to have formal assessments for things like ADHD. So it's not always possible to get a full medical report on the diagnosis and management plan. In which case, a report from a current employer, a school or a college, a sports team coach, a scout leader, I'm sure there are many other examples that I've missed off that list, but somebody who knows the individual well in that sort of environment and can outline how the individual interacts with others. How do they behave in different situations? Can they follow spoken and written instructions to perform a task to completion? Can they follow 2 or 3 lots of instructions to perform 2 or 3 tasks to completion, either under pressure or at the same time? Can they prioritise and make decisions? And importantly, how do they react to working under pressure, such as may be required in an emergency situation on board? We've said a lot about medication, but again, if the seafarer is taking medication, the prescription is useful to have, so we know how much they're taking and what they're taking. And I would also strongly recommend that any seafarer who's been diagnosed with ADHD and is taking such medication speaks to their employer or their potential employer early on, so that the employer is aware and expectations can be managed. Once we have all the information, we can make that individual risk assessment that includes the medical condition, ADHD or others, any medication taken, and the duties and sailing area of that particular seafarer, and then issue a certificate, maybe a 2-year unrestricted certificate, but maybe a time limited or restricted certificate, as we described earlier. Don't leave it to the last minute, particularly if this is your first medical examination. Assessment of some of these conditions can be complex and require a lot of information. So allow yourself and us time in which to obtain that and to make a risk assessment.
What happens if the seafarer is not happy with the outcome of their medical assessment? Is there an appeals process, and how does that work?
So if the seafarer isn't happy, there is an appeals process. The details of that are found on the back of the ENG3, which must be issued along with an ENG1 if restrictions are placed on that certificate, or issued in isolation if a seafarer is made temporarily unfit for more than 3 months or made permanently unfit. Any appeal must then be made within 1 month of that certificate being issued. The appeal process involves a review of the approved doctor's decision by one of 7 medical referees who are independent in their assessment of the medical condition within the context of the seafarer's role, but they do still work to the same standards in MSN 1886. The seafarer will meet with the referee, either in person or, if both agree, that can be done remotely via a video call. And the seafarer has the opportunity, obviously, then to present their situation, to present any additional documentation they may have acquired after their initial ENG examination. And the referee, of course, may ask for further information. Based on all of that, the referee will then make their decision. They may uphold the approved doctor's decision, or they may change it. But I think it's important to say that if the decision is changed, it doesn't always go the way the seafarer might wish. There is no guarantee how they will change it with their interpretation of the medical condition within those standards. Also important to say that this is the right way to proceed if a seafarer isn't happy with the approved doctor's decision. Please don't try going to another approved doctor to get a different decision with the same information, or not declaring the information you've already declared to one doctor. All approved doctors and referees have access to all seafarer medical examination records through a secure online system. And going to another approved doctor, this so-called doctor shopping, is not advisable. And the second doctor will simply refer them back to the original doctor and to follow the correct procedure. It becomes a waste of time and money.
Just to wrap up now then, is there anything else you'd like to say to Nautilus members with ADHD about their medical assessment and maritime careers?
I think it's really important for everybody to understand that having any medical condition, including ADHD, does not necessarily prevent people from becoming seafarers or continuing to work as seafarers. Many individuals with ADHD do go on to have a successful career in the maritime industry, and the MCA fully supports prospective seafarers in that endeavour. I've said before, we are keen for people to work at sea. We are not trying to stop them. We're trying to make sure it's safe for them and others for them to do so. So for those with a pre-existing condition, including ADHD, my top tip would be to acknowledge that a certificate may not be given the first time. Please don't apply the day before you intend to embark on the vessel, and allow sufficient time for the process. It may be the case that more information is requested or required, and gathering it could take time.